Have you ever had a dream with a bunch of people that you haven't thought about in years and then woken up in the weirdest state of mind, almost as if you've kind of been transported to that period of time? That happened to me this morning. I had a really vivid dream about some people from high school, and I went down this weird rabbit hole this morning where I was looking at messages and emails and all this stuff that I had sent from like 10 years ago, and it just really brought me into this weird headspace. And then it made me think about this question of, what is it about high school experiences that have such a lasting impact on us? I'm a registered psychotherapist. My name is Christina Vero, and I've also heard this from a lot of people that I work with. They will have been bullied in high school or middle school or whatever, or they may have just heard like one comment and it really seems to stick with them into adulthood. And so it makes me wonder, why is that the case? So being the curious person that I am, I decided to look into this. So what's interesting is that our brain is very unique during high school. So there's a few things that are going on. One, we have hormones that are flooding our system, so everything feels very intense. But during this time of our life, this is when dopamine activity is also the highest. So everything feels a little bit more intense for that reason as well. You then couple that with the fact that our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. That doesn't fully develop until 25 years of age or beyond. The prefrontal cortex is right here, this frontmost part of your brain, and it's in charge of things like logical thinking, analyzing, problem solving, thinking about the future, all those complex types of processes. So you have these huge emotions when you're a teenager. You don't have this fully functioning and fully formed prefrontal cortex. And obviously that's going to create this perfect storm where you feel very, very big emotions. And anytime that we feel a really, really heightened emotion, our memory is actually more likely to store it very, very vividly, according to memory researchers. So memory researchers have coined this term called the reminiscence bomb. And what this means is that we have the most vivid memories from around the ages of 10 to 30. And what's interesting is that memory storage is actually not very consistent throughout the lifespan. It is more active and heightened during that time period because we're going through way more significant life changes and events that our brain is likely to remember. I think that also explains why later in life, when there tends to be a lot more monotony and not as much of these big events, we don't really remember as much and everything kind of becomes a bit of a blur. So when you're going through things like experiencing your first relationship, graduating, choosing what university you want to go to, making your first best friend, going through your first breakup, all that stuff, your brain is so much more likely to remember that, which is why I think we remember things from high school so well, obviously. There's a researcher named Brene Brown who has defined shame as having an unwanted label or identity. And a lot of people have this unwanted label that goes all the way back to high school. That might have been the first time that they got given a particular label as they were sorting through their identity and who they want to be. So for example, I've worked with people who have said they got bullied for various things, whether it was being a slut or being fat or whatever it happened to be, and they still carry that with them into adulthood because, you know, that's a period of time where we're really figuring out who we are. And if other people are telling us certain things, we might kind of bring that into our sense of self and carry it with us into adulthood, even if it might not feel or be true at all anymore. And that's another thing about high school experiences. So you have this brain that's kind of absorbing everything. You're at a stage of life where you're really figuring out who you are, who you want to be, who your friends are, all this stuff. So the experiences that you go through sort of shape your template of the world. For example, if your first relationship is really, really rocky and your partner cheats on you or something, you might then bring that into the world as thinking that that's normal for relationships. Because if you think about it, you actually have absolutely nothing really to compare it to in terms of your own firsthand experiences. So a lot of your years thereafter can be about unlearning certain things or kind of realizing that what you experienced might not have been normal. And that can be a really painful process for some people. It can also be really, really eye-opening as well. So if you find yourself saying, I have no idea why I am so impacted by these high school experiences, hopefully that helps explain it a little bit so that you're not as embarrassed or ashamed about it or whatever. I also think that when we reflect on high school, there's a feeling of nostalgia comes up because for me, the phrase that comes to mind is youth is wasted on the young. I think about that a lot because, you know, high school is a time where you really didn't have responsibilities for many of us, right? A lot of us, if you were in a fortunate situation, we're not paying bills. You weren't taking care of kids, all this stuff, but you didn't realize that you didn't have those stressors. And so then you become an adult and you think, oh my gosh, life is so hard. I wish I had appreciated some of the good old days. So that nostalgia, I also think, is really, really powerful emotionally and can cause us to reminisce or over-glorify situations or whatever it happens to be. So if you find yourself thinking about high school a lot, whether it's in a good way or a not so good way, I have some ideas about how you can work through that. First of all, I just want to say that our memory is extremely fickle and we often take all the memories that we have at face value. There is so much research out there about how stupid our memory is and how bad it is. I mean, if you want to just blow your brain a little bit, just Google the Mandela effect. Oh my gosh, your mind will be blown. I was a little bit messed up for like a day after I read about that one. But the point being that the things that you're remembering might not actually be true. So sometimes that gives me peace of mind that, maybe the story that I'm telling myself is just that. It's just a story. There actually might be more to the picture. The second thing that I like to do is to remember that all of us were so young in high school and we really had no idea what we were doing. And we were doing the absolute best that we could with what we knew at the time. So if you were bullied by somebody, I'm not excusing bullying behavior, but at the same time, if you picture that person as a 15-year-old and then you look at a 15-year-old, you'll realize, oh my gosh, we were so young and we just didn't know what we were doing. And there might have been reasons why that person was going through a hard time. So really what it's about is using your adult brain to bring some perspective on a period of time where you didn't have that prefrontal cortex that could have that perspective. I also think that it is really important to just not take life so seriously sometimes, to find a sense of humor. If you're somebody who thinks about cringy things that you did in high school or whatever, I actually work with a lot of people who talk about that. We all did cringy things in high school. That was the whole point. That was what we were all going through. That is what unifies us, is that we were all awkward and strange and figuring ourselves out and doing super cringy things. And you know what? Even today's teenagers will look back and be like, oh my gosh, that was so cringy. It's part of the life experience. You gotta have a sense of humor about it. Don't take it so seriously. If you find that you reminisce a lot about high school experiences to the point where it actually really, really has an impact on your mental health, there's a couple things that you can ask yourself just to get curious about it. One is, what am I trying to avoid by fantasizing about high school or thinking about high school experiences or whatever? So for example, some people like to fantasize because it gives them a break from their current reality that might be not so great or might be kind of painful. So, what experiences are you avoiding in the present, or what are you trying to feel more of by reminiscing or reflecting on your high school time? That can lead to some really, really interesting answers. You can journal about that. You can talk about it with a therapist, whatever is helpful. If you have really, really stubborn negative memories, I would also recommend that you look into something called EMDR. That stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Very, very big mouthful, but it's a really cool type of therapy. It is not talk therapy at all. It basically requires you to do certain eye movements with the guidance of a health professional. And what it basically says is that these eye movements happen as you're thinking about certain situations, and it causes your brain to reprocess things in like a neural way. It's pretty cool. It's actually recommended by the US Department of Veteran Affairs and the World Health Organization for processing trauma. I have a whole resource about what EMDR is on my website if you want to check it out, but it's a good way of basically giving your brain a software update if you find yourself stuck in certain memories. So anyway, I hope that this video helped to shed some light on why we sometimes are so impacted by experiences from our past and what you can do about it if you find yourself feeling a little bit stuck. Let me know in the comments what your experience of high school was like. Do you miss it? Are you like, I wish I never go back there ever again? How do you feel about today's teens in high school? Just let's have a conversation. Let me know in the comments below.